Welcome to Behavioral Grooves, the podcast that explores the why we do what we do of our human behavior. I'm Kurt Nelson.
And I'm Tim Houlihan. We bring you conversations with scientists, authors, and fascinating thinkers to help you apply behavioral science to your work and life, and maybe even help you find your groove.
This episode is one of those conversations that does both. We sat down with economist, philosopher, and author Mark Fabian to explore some deep, thought-provoking ideas about happiness, well-being, and meaning. You know, his new book, Beyond Happiness, does exactly what the title promises. It takes us beyond the pursuit of fleeting joy and into the realm of self-actualization, values, and something he calls generalized flow.
Mark is an associate professor of public policy at the University of Warwick in the Department of Politics and International Studies. And we should note, Mark brings a really fresh voice to this discussion. Yes, he cites Mihai Csikszentmihalyi as one of those who systematically identified flow. He builds on self-determination theory, which is a critical part of our sense of agency to go out and do what we want to do. But he also challenges the idea that this very common idea that happiness should be our end goal, and uses the familiar frame of the hedonic treadmill to help us rethink it.
And we've talked about the hedonic treadmill in the past, but just as a refresher, it's the idea that over the course of our lives, we have a relatively stable level of happiness, like being on a treadmill and not really going further or moving forward. But as we acquire more stuff and greater experiences in our life, we simply adapt to these new circumstances and return to that base level of happiness. So in other words, we don't go anywhere further in our happiness, regardless of how much stuff we have, because it's like a treadmill.
Yeah, and that leads to this never-ending loop of wanting more experiences to be happy, but never really getting there. And Mark argues that rather than thinking our happiness as a destination, we should think about making actually the treadmill itself, that is the journey itself, the thing that we fall in love with and the things that we take joy and happiness from.
Exactly. And it's not about reaching a destination of joy. There's no joy island that we're going to. It's about building a life where the process itself brings fulfillment, satisfaction, and a sense of general well-being. And I love it because Mark weaves together psychology, philosophy, and behavioral science in a way that's as approachable as it is rigorous.
So whether you're a meaning seeker, a behavioral nerd, or someone just trying to figure out how to live a more intentional life, you're going to love this one.
But before we dive in, a quick thank you to all of those people out there who leave us reviews and support the show, especially our Podbean and Spotify listeners who seem to be in an arms race of kindness in the comments section. Thank you.
Yeah, we are grateful, truly. Now, it's time to grab your metaphorical running shoes because we're heading beyond the hedonic treadmill with our guest, Mark Fabian. Mark Fabian, welcome to Behavioral Grooves.
Thanks so much for having me on the show. Very excited for the conversation.
It's a pleasure, and we're excited to be talking about your new book. But first, we need to find out, coffee or tea?
So I have very strong opinions about this, but it really depends on the time of day. So first thing in the morning, straight after lunch, hardcore coffee every time, no exceptions. The rest of the time, tea, and I drink a lot of both.
So the no exceptions on this, like there is, what is that hard line? Why is there a hard line?
I just don't think I would ever take tea in the morning. Like that's not, it's not really a thing. It's not what I need at that time. I need something with a bit more kind of oomph to it. So there are supposedly some teas that have that, like Russian Caravan. So maybe I just need to explore a wider range of
Explore
teas.
the wider range of teas. But, you know,
Classic English breakfast tea isn't enough to just blow your head apart.
So I actually don't drink classic English breakfast tea. I can't stand it. I have some Earl Grey in the house, but only for my British friends who drink Earl Grey.
Okay. Okay. 1,000 more questions along that too, but
We could spend
we'll
the
keep going.
entire
Yeah.
episode on that, but we won't. We won't for just the sake of our listeners. All right, second speed round question, Mark. Would you prefer to have dinner with your favorite filmmaker or your favorite musician?
I guess filmmaker in this case, which is Hayao Miyazaki, but I just watched the Hayao Miyazaki documentary on Netflix.
Yeah.
And I kind of, on that basis, wonder what it would be like whether it might just be a slightly surreal experience. And you couldn't really dig into, I guess I want to know like where his ideas come from. What does he think the symbols mean? That kind of stuff. But in the doco, he really doesn't talk about any of that sort of thing at all. And yeah, I wonder whether that might then actually be a slightly disappointing conversation for me.
Ooh.
Yeah. But I think he's my favorite director and I would love to have dinner with him. So
well, and it's interesting because normally we would ask your favorite musician versus athlete or actor, but because of the almost I don't know, part of that whole chapter that you wrote about it, that I'm like, oh no, we got to get filmmaker in here.
Sure.
So
on
that might
athlete or
influence
musician, it would be musician in that case. I actually have spent a fair bit of my life around fairly high level athletes, and I really like them as people, but they are generally a bit dull. Because they're very singularly dedicated to one thing.
They have
bravo. Yeah, that's good. Good. Bully for them. Alrighty. So third speed round question. Is it a good thing or a bad thing that our modern world allows us to pursue a nearly infinite number of ways to find our path?
Oof, wow, straight out the gate. That is a good one. I guess I think it's a good thing, but you guys are into the behavioral science, so you would know about choice overload and these kind of problems. So I think it's a good thing that we're able to choose from a wide range of things to do with our life. What I think is maybe a bad thing is that we have really stopped giving people any sort of guidance as to how to go about that. So we used to socialize people into particular cultural structures that would sort of lay out what you were supposed to do. And that still happens a bit. Like if you go to med school and you're a local GP, like people will generally celebrate that and say you're doing right by your community. But over the tail end of the 20th century, I think we kind of cut down a lot of those kind of cultural structures for good reason. Like they were often sort of oppressive, and they're not inclusive and all these kind of things. But now we're a bit lost at sea. And I think we could do a bit more to kind of help people, particularly through our educational institutions, particularly through early high school, not so much university, where I think a lot of this stuff does happen, to prepare people for life and help them chart their way through all those options that they have. Whereas at the moment, we really just prepare people for work.
Yeah.
And I think there's a bit more to it than that.
Okay, Mark, this isn't the next speed round question, but it's a follow-up to this because I think this is interesting. So we talk about like might be a good thing overall, but for well-being, is it a good thing to have this open-ended, all things possible versus what has been traditional for many years, as you talked about, and kind of the more of the guidance? Where do you fall on that scale?
I still lean towards it being a good thing that you can do whatever it is that you want. But I think if you are just, as I say, like sort of lost at sea with all those options, then it's a bad thing. And I think that's especially true for most people. So there will be people like I would put myself in this camp who don't really need a lot of guidance and are kind of obsessed with their autonomy and obsessed with making their own decisions in life and that sort of thing. And I would rather just have all the options and I'll kind of figure it out. That said, I was raised in a way to think about these kind of questions from a fairly early age. But I think a lot of people would much rather plug into a kind of system. And then we need to have, even if that system is liberalism, pluralism, figure out what you want to do, we still need to socialize people into that and induct them into that.
Yeah. Thank you. I'm in alignment in general with what you've said. So I just wanted to get your thoughts on that as we're moving forward. Last speed round question. As we talked about, these are never really
this is still the speed round.
We're still in the speed round.
Yes, this is still here. In your opinion, are we wired to be happy but dissatisfied?
Yes. So this is kind of the first chapter of the book. wired to be happy in the sense that we're just kind of generally in a pretty neutral mood, maybe like slightly positive. So I don't mean happy in the sense that you're ecstatic all the time or anything like that. And I certainly don't think that we're wired to think of happiness as a goal. We're sort of wired to perpetuate our genes, basically. But happiness is a sign that you're kind of getting warmer or that you're doing things in a way that your genes might approve of. What we're not wired to be is ecstatic all the time, because then we tend to be indolent. Like we tend to just kind of enjoy this wonderful ecstasy that we're feeling, and we don't collect nuts for the winter or whatever it might be. And yeah, similarly, we wouldn't be depressed all the time, because then we're just like crying under a tree instead of figuring out what we need to do to survive better. So we have this kind of general background level of positive mood that we tend to revert to. So you know that if you miss the bus or something like that, you might be ticked off for a moment, but a few hours later, you won't even remember that bad mood that you were in. And then on top of that, we have this like tiny bit of dissatisfaction. So we tend to see ways that our life could be better. And you need to kind of, I think, train yourself and have a culture that reinforces the idea that you shouldn't think like that in order to get away from that. I don't think that's like genetic destiny, that we can't conquer that instinct in ourselves, but there is a tendency to always look for ways to be better. And I think that's also evolved. So we're always competing with predators, competing with parasites. They're always evolving ways to get better at harming us. And so we also need to be hustling.
Thank you for, I so appreciate, this is a great way to start the discussion, because it certainly informs readers that this is not a 5 steps to happiness book.
No,
like there's some complexity in it, and we love that about it. But we are talking to Mark about his new book, Beyond Happiness. So let's just set a baseline. What do you mean by happiness? And could you also then just expand that into differentiating happiness from well-being?
Thanks. Yeah, it's a very important question. So I guess I think of happiness mostly as a mood. And I think an easy way into it is to say when you're happy, you're smiling. When you're well, you're not necessarily smiling. But I think if you're never smiling, you're probably not well. Philosophers have a really neat way of, I think, explaining what well-being is, which is what makes your life go well or what is intrinsically good for you. So we're talking about a good life. I think a life with no happiness in it is probably in most cases not a good life. But I can imagine situations where you were a freedom fighter or a guerrilla or something like that, and you feel really strongly with intense conviction about what you're doing, and you're miserable because you're hiding out in the jungle or whatever, and you're getting shelled all the time. Like some people in Myanmar at the moment are probably feeling this kind of way, and you still think that's the only legitimate thing for you to be doing. And you are well, but you're not happy. So I can think of some edge cases, but taking the sort of typical citizen of an OECD nation, I think most of us will want to be happy some of the time. But happiness in this sort of mood sense is not the goal. I think what we want is the good life. And I would characterize a good life as one that's pleasant, but also fulfilling and valuable.
Mark, I'm just kind of digging into what you were just saying there, though, about even those freedom fighters that are in Myanmar or wherever it is that they're doing. If their life is full of misery, is that still a well life? Because I would assume, and this is a huge assumption on my part, that there are connectivities. There are those moments with other freedom fighters where there is some joy, that there is the smile that you talked about coming to their face, and I could see that being a key component overall of that, because if they were the lone person out in that wilderness and really not having any of that happiness part of what you've talked about, that feeling, that I don't even know if that, I mean, would that still be considered a well-being and fulfilling life for them, or is there something missing if that's not part of that?
I'm open to the possibility. Yeah, it does make sense. I'm open to the possibility that they can still be well, but I think you're broadly right that if you don't have emotional and social feedback that's broadly encouraging on occasion, then you're not going to be able to persist with particular values or particular behaviors that you're engaging with long term. I also think it's worth underlining that, because I think freedom fighters are a very curious case study. I have actually thought about them a fair bit in terms of being a values-led person and what that involves. And fighting against oppressive systems is very costly, particularly for the first movers, the people who have to kind of try to generate the collective action. And so I wouldn't sort of expect people to have a duty to work against oppressive regimes. There will be some people who feel compelled, and they will feel compelled somehow arising out of themselves, and they will initially get this positive emotional feedback from themselves that says this is the right thing to be doing and you have to go and do it. But then I think they will want to meet some other people who also feel the same way. And so I think of people like the people who staged the original sit-ins in the civil rights movement in America, who got beaten up and had all sorts of other horrible things done to them, but they were like, I must do this. In the words of Martin Luther, like, here I stand, I cannot do otherwise. And that comes initially from emotional stuff and intuition and conviction. But then I think you do need that social reinforcement.
Reminds me of the work of Ari Kukliansky on this idea of striving for significance. Like there's this tremendous drive that we have. But I want to get back to the happiness thing for just a sec, if we could, because the book is called Beyond Happiness. Is this a transcendental sort of idea of beyond, or is it taking happiness to sort of the next level and leveling up, if you were?
I guess more leveling up. There is a very big strand of the book that's about what you might call transcendence. So the whole third part of the book on the valuable life is about maps of meaning and finding purpose, being a values-driven person, being a values-driven community, this kind of stuff. But I think I'm more talking about just getting a bit more sophisticated, deep, rich with how we conceptualize a good life, so that it's not just tranquil and pleasant. Those things are great. But I think ultimately you'd get a bit bored with that in a lot of cases. And so we want to think in a more conceptually expansive way about what it is that we're trying to get to.
Yeah. In the conclusion of the book, I'm jumping all the way to the end, I apologize, but I think it kind of lends this thread throughout the entire book. You write this, and I'm going to quote it here, so let me read it. We've tried to find the end of the treadmill instead of finding the treadmill that we love to run on. So why do we need to learn to love to run on a treadmill and not just go for a destination?
Thank you. This is a great question. So this kind of comes back to what we were talking about before with mood as something that's sort of homeostatically protected. Like, we tend to come back to this equilibrium, and it's hard for us to stay ecstatic, and it's also hard for us to stay in a bad mood for a long time. Occasionally that happens, like you get knocked into a depression, but something quite drastic has happened. Probably multiple things have happened consecutively. And I don't really know of anything that can put us into an ecstatic mood for a very sustained period of time. And then we also have this little level of dissatisfaction that always makes us want to kind of add something more. And that's what we might call the hedonic treadmill. The hedonic treadmill is a sort of pretty contested and varied term in the scientific literature, but there's this kind of metaphorical idea of us running to stay in place, and there's always a little carrot in front of us that we're trying to grab. So what I mean by making the treadmill a place you want to be is that I think our culture typically puts out this idea that you can get to the end of the treadmill. You just got to get the carrot. So in materialistic cultures, in materialistic symbols, you just got to buy something. Your house has got to be a bit bigger, or you've got to get that new golf club, and then your game will be perfect. And once you get your handicap down, then you'll be at the end of the treadmill. And then I think also,
doesn't work for me on the golf club. No. That's for damn sure. I
think golf's particularly interesting because you can never finish golf. Your score just comes down. I think that's actually a line at the end of Bag of Ants or something like that. It's like you can never finish the game of golf. It's a powerful metaphor. And then in Buddhism, and I quite like Buddhism. My partner's a Buddhist. I think there's a lot of wisdom in the doctrine. But particularly in Tibetan Buddhism, the objective is sort of to rid yourself of all desires. And I think this is also about getting off the treadmill. Like, there is no carrot. The carrot's an illusion. You're an illusion. And we just want to be very ascetic, give of ourselves a lot, and in that way we can step off this treadmill completely. And I think that's potentially a very useful exercise for a lot of people to think about what desires could you be rid of, in what ways could you just chill. But I kind of argue for something a bit different in my book, which is that you should try to make the treadmill a place you like to be. And that's first and foremost about making it pleasant. So you don't want the treadmill to suddenly go up a gradient. You don't want it to speed up all at random, this kind of thing. And so that means having like financial security. It means not having toxic people in your life, this sort of thing. And then you need to think about what it is that you want to do on that treadmill. So this is where this values-driven life kind of comes in. You want to do a bunch of self-examination, talk to people who you respect and trust and this kind of thing, figure out what sort of person you want to be, what sort of change you want to inspire in the world. And then this will mean that the treadmill for you is a generally pleasant place, but it's also dynamic, engaging, stimulating. And so you wake up most days thinking like, oh, cool, I'm alive. Like, let's go. And I think that's kind of what I mean as well by getting beyond happy. It's not that I wake up in the morning thinking like, oh, I have such a like buzz going, or I'm smiling so much. That's great. Like I think that is, I have had some periods of my life that were like that, and they were really great periods in my life. But part of why those periods happen is because the rest of the time I have projects, I have relationships that I'm investing in, this kind of stuff.
Yeah. It's the coffee that you have every morning that gets you that kind of, there you go.
Often I don't get going. I don't get the buzz till the coffee hits. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. All right.
So it's not about pursuing happiness or well-being. It's about...
No, that's right. So happiness is not a goal. It's information. I think that's the easy way to think about it. There's kind of a whole section in the book on how to listen to your emotional signals and particularly your affective motivational signals, and how to then introspect on them and interpret them and use them as a guide to developing this treadmill that suits you.
And does this flow into the one of the things that you mentioned is that common trope about if you love what you do, you never work a day in your life?
Yeah, I think that's broadly right. I feel like I took that very, very seriously as a teenager, and I have kind of created a life for myself that's as close to that as possible, and you still work quite a lot.
Yeah.
So I don't like, and I think there can also be a bit of a trap in that, which is that often we get sort of addicted to meaning, or we get addicted to purpose or something like that. And so you're like, oh, this is this thing that I'm really kind of striving on. And it actually inhibits your ability to notice when you're kind of over investing and not caring for yourself and not taking enough time out. And these are very sort of nascent thoughts for me. I haven't really developed them properly to articulate them to you, but I have started to think that idea of you'll never work a day in your life is actually a little bit dangerous. And I need to unpack it a bit more. But yeah, it's certainly getting along those lines, that if you're putting together the things that you find stimulating, interesting, dynamic, etc., then you will generally be finding your life pleasant, fulfilling, and valuable.
Yeah, we had a conversation, Tim, and I'm drawing a blank on the names of the two authors about callings, and actually they had done some research where individuals who kind of pursued their calling were actually more dissatisfied than many others, and particularly they were looking at like professional musicians in symphonies, getting first or second chair compared to garbage workers. And garbage workers on average were more satisfied with their life than some of these others. And they did not say that garbage was, a calling for them by any means, where that was what these other people have been striving for. So I think there's definitely something in what you're saying, that there can be an over-indexing as you talk about there. So
absolutely. But can I make one small point here, particularly with the athletes who come second? So I think as I recall that research, there was also a comparison between like silver medalists and people who came third or something like that. And the people who got the bronze were much happier. But that's because the silver people knew they could have gotten gold, right? And I think with Olympians especially, where you only get a shot every 4 years, which means you probably only get 1 or 2 shots, and you think, I could have done it, and I just missed on that day. Like
if I would have just done a little bit more practice, if I would have, you can have that regret, right?
That just must be brutal to think you put 25 years into something, and the evidence that you're looking for that you are the person you would ideally like to be is that gold medal. And you can get it, and that that's the only indication that counts. And you can talk all the rest of it like, on a different day or whatever. If I hadn't eaten too many pancakes for breakfast, I would have won the 100-meter sprint. I can imagine that, but that would just eat away at you. So I think that's those are two very different sorts of people, the garbage collectors and these kind of the strivers. So I'm a bit reluctant to apples compare them.
Yeah, and I think that's a really interesting piece. I could I want to see like Mark Spitz though eating those pancakes. That's what I'm kind of just thinking about right at this point. I want to get back into this idea of finding out who who we are then. So, right, as part of what you're talking about is, it's that self-reflection of being able to understand what are those values that you have in various different things. And you talk a lot about that. So, one of the things I liked about the book is that you focused on understanding that core self and that authentic you. But many people find that difficult because of the way that we've been raised, the social aspects of identity, a myriad of other factors that you bring up in the book. What are some ways that people can peel back those layers to help really identify, what it is that's important to them and who they are?
It is indeed super difficult. I think to start with some very simple things, we can try to just sort of borrow the methods of psychotherapy. And I don't think you have to get into dream analysis or anything like that. But I do think you need to turn inwards. So there is a point pretty early in the book where I say, if you feel you're a bit miserable, you can't quite work it out, you've got to tune out from the influences. That includes all the people trying to sell you stuff. It includes me in this book. So I put the book down and then create some kind of environment in which you can introspect. And it's probably not going to happen the first time. You're probably going to need to do it a lot, over and over again, iteratively. But the kind of environments I'm talking about, I think, have a few characteristics. So one is that there's no real distractions and you feel relaxed. So for some people, that's just going to be like having a nice bath, get some lavender oils in there, feel really calm and relaxed, and then you can turn inwards a bit. For other people, I think for me, what really works a lot is going somewhere quite primordial. So I like to go on sort of multi-day hikes, no devices, that sort of thing, and try to find environments where time feels very continuous. And so you don't feel this kind of urgency and you don't feel the sort of distractions that modern life throws at you. And that can also create, I think, a nice space for ideas to emerge. And then my final piece of advice here in terms of the environment that you want to create is that you might need to make space for boredom. I think this is something that I've had big problems with lately. The world that we live in is such an attention economy. It's always trying to grab you for something. And I think we can become, I'm certainly a bit of a junkie for news stuff, new podcasts that are cool, new books that are great, new art, new movies, whatever. There's always something available. But if you're always getting that other stimulus, you don't make time to have a dialogue with yourself and for things to emerge from inside. So the most important thing is to turn inwards, at least initially. You have to give enough space to listen to your own advice about what to do with your life. And that's a skill that you have to develop, how to dialogue with yourself. And I don't know if it can really be taught. You just got to learn by doing.
This concept resonates deeply with us,
great.
Mark. Yeah, this idea of sort of building your life, creating the context that you want to live into. It just resonates so positively with us and means a lot to us. And it also, but to get there, you are pretty strong in saying that you've got to pursue some degree of self-awareness, and it really ought to become a practice. Right, that you're better off with some kind of regular investment in discovering who your core self is, or your true self. Right? Is that fair?
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. I think it's iterative; it stays with you for life, and sometimes you have to reconnect with it. So I think when I was a teenager, I spent a lot of time riding trains, kind of medium distance trains, and just staring out the window. And I think I did a lot of good work there. And then I remember by the time a lot of good internal work. And then I remember by the time I was doing my PhD, I was complaining to my mum once about all these people that just like stare out the window on the bus. That's like time that you can use productively. Because by then I'd sort of figured out what I wanted to do with my time. And so I thought, look at all these numpties. But so I think I lost some insight that I had once had. And now I'm kind of more actively reintroducing these periods of boredom. And particularly I noticed that when I procrastinated in the past, it'd flick through my email inboxes and then like check social media or something. And now I just get up out of the chair, ideally go for a little walk around the block or something like that, but even just stare out the window or sit on the couch or say hi to my partner or something like that. But just something that's actually switching your brain off and letting it bring up things from below.
Hey Groovers, quick break from the conversation to talk about something we don't bring up enough on the show.
Yeah, that's right. When we're not behind the mic, we're working with organizations to apply behavioral science in ways that actually move the needle for leaders, teams, and whole cultures.
So whether it's designing smarter incentives, boosting engagement, setting goals that actually stick, or helping teams navigate change, we bring real science to real workplace challenges.
And we don't just talk theory. Our approach blends research-backed insights with hands-on strategies that drive results. Now, we've seen small behavioral shifts lead to big wins in Fortune 500 companies and scrappy startups and even in mission-driven nonprofits.
Yeah, and we bring the same curiosity, creativity, and care to our client work that we bring to every episode of the show.
Really, I think people might want more than what we bring to the show.
Yeah, you probably point there. You're probably right.
Okay, so we'll bring more care and creativity to our work with you and your teams than what we do on the show.
Yes, more care. So if you're ready to build stronger motivation, better team dynamics, and maybe even make your workplace a little more groovy,
yeah, reach out to us. Grab us on LinkedIn or Facebook, or just drop us a line. We'd love to help you and your team find your groove. Okay, even though our listeners in the United States are a minority of all of our listeners, what is a medium distance train?
Yeah, great question. I guess about an hour would be a sort of medium distance train. Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
So short distance train ride is like taking the tube in London from like zone 3 to zone 1. So that's going to take you about 15 minutes. And then a long train ride is city to city or interstate.
Like London to Wimbledon or something like that. Right?
That's a medium distance train.
That's a medium distance train.
Okay. Yeah, and then London to Manchester. That's a long distance train.
That's a long distance
train. All right. We got it.
Yeah. I'm glad we got that out of the way.
Yeah. Well, I want to get back to this bored aspect because it is something that I've noticed, at least with my kids, is that they have been raised in a world with stimulation, as you've just talked about, and I find it really hard. Like if we're on anything, they cannot be bored, right? There is this is almost this kind of response that they have where it feels almost physical to them, even to the point where watching a movie, they need to have their device in their hand and playing a game. So those 10 seconds of visual viewing of like the countryside, they're down playing their game as opposed to just enjoying what's going on. Is there something that you see changing in our society? And I know this isn't in your book, so I apologize if we're taking a tangent here, but is there something that you see in our society that is leading us to this idea that you can't ride a medium distance train and just stare out the window, that you do need to be doing something all of the time? And what is that doing to us?
I do think there's something going on because I notice it in myself, but I'm not a boredom or attention researcher, so I don't really know what this is about. I'm sure that social media has like something to do with it, but there might be a lot of other stuff going on. I think generally the kind of access to information, particularly when it's in your pocket, is probably a big part of it as well. I've definitely noticed that in order to overcome exactly the behavioral thing that you just mentioned, where you're watching a movie while also looking at stuff on your phone, I have gone back to using cinemas a lot more than I used to, because in a cinema, like big surround sound, big screen, blackout, you seem really rude if you're on your phone in a cinema.
Right. But the social norm is don't have a phone near you when you're actually in the theater.
I go to the dance quite a lot here in London. That's one of my favorite. I don't really like London, but the dance is incredible here, world class. Anyway, I go to the dance often, and for some reason, I often seem to be sitting I go by myself, and I'm often sitting next to elderly women who are also by themselves, kind of in the front row, who are clearly there because they love dance. And anytime someone else in the row takes their phone out, I just see these women give them the death stares, like, so intensely. And sometimes you can even hear them be like, the deep derision. So I've been going back to the cinemas because I think it allows you to immerse yourself much more heavily in what you're doing and pay attention for
Yeah,
that,
I
and it
think
has
it's
improved the experience.
yeah, I think there's a really interesting piece of that, and I think there is the more that we can allow ourselves to have that boredom or to have that singular focus, I think is going to be really important. In the book, Mark, you write, we're going back to this identity part, and one of the pieces that I really liked about it, I think Tim probably did too, is you bring up this idea that we talk about that there's multitudes of self-concepts,
Mm-hmm.
right? That we're not just a single identity, that there is a multitude. Can you elaborate on that for our listeners?
Yeah, for sure. I think to some extent, what you are ultimately trying to get to is a harmonized self so that you make sense and your life makes sense and it makes sense in the context of the wider world in which you live and the networks and the environment and all that sort of stuff. Early on in your self actualization, there's going to be parts of you that don't make sense. They're just kind of deeply incompatible, and you need to think about ways to resolve those incompatibilities. And sometimes that's just going to be about contextualizing them. So one of the examples that I use in the book, which comes from Showers and Ziegler-Hill, who are two psychologists in the States, is this super dad persona. So this is a guy who wants to be like a hard-charging corporate behemoth at work. But if he brought that personality home, he would terrify his children and alienate them, and he'd lose their love and he'd feel really bad. So he needs to have two different personas, and it's pretty easy for him to contextualize one of them to the workplace and one of them to the household. And so I think that's one way that we can get this sort of work done. Obviously, in reality, it's often going to be more complicated than just, oh, this is my work persona and this is my home persona. There will be certain parts of yourself that you only share with certain friends of yours or that come to the fore with certain friends of yours. Your hobby communities, for example, you can go on and on and on about whatever it is, Warhammer. Maybe you don't want to bring that home to your wife. She doesn't care as much about Warhammer. Or she thinks it's cute, but she doesn't really want to hear all the ins and outs. That's, yeah. So speaking from personal experience. So yeah, I think the key thing here is to focus on social and emotional feedback. So you want to think about what kind of things you feel in each of these different circumstances, what sort of things people are telling you in these different circumstances, particularly people who you respect and care about and genuinely want to be loved by, cared for by, these kind of things. Because often you'll get social feedback from people who aren't really people that you need to be worrying about because they're toxic or they're only interested in you instrumentally or whatever it might be. And you need to then develop the skill of introspecting on these emotional signals. So, in the super dad's case, I think that's, again, pretty straightforward because the kids would just be terrified. And that's the sort of social signal that the dad is going to get. And then he's going to feel bad because, oh, I scared my kids. And then you reflect on that and you think, oh, I shouldn't behave this way here.
Yeah, I want to just follow up on this because this idea of the multiple self, the multiple dimensions of who we are, the multiple personas. Because I've met a number of people over the years who sort of disclaim and dispute this idea that they're just like, I'm myself all the time. You know, you don't get in my way because I'm 100% me constantly. How common, and from my perspective, and from I think science would back this up, that that's just not correct. We might be ourselves in a very large sense, but as you noted, super dad comes home. He's not the same person at the office as he is at home. How common is that myth?
Honestly, I couldn't say. I know that's a sort of lame answer, but I think these things are very hard to measure, so it'd be difficult for us to get a strong sense of that. Maybe those people you mentioned have gone very far in self-actualization and they feel very harmonized across all aspects of their personality and their character and their values and whatever. And so it's so seamless for them to sort of switch between contexts and switch between people that they're talking to and that sort of thing, that they feel very authentic all the time. I'd like to think I'm a bit like that at this stage, but it's taken me a long time to get here. And I also noticed that I am quite different depending on who I'm hanging out with. Like, so what I mean is different parts of myself will come to the fore. I think you want to be careful with people who are, in a sense, so stubborn about their identity, and I dare say often a bit selfish or a bit egoistic, that they are themselves, despite a lot of social feedback that's telling them
Yeah.
that they're kind of unpleasant in various ways and that maybe they should ameliorate those behaviors. Yeah, I want to keep an eye out for that.
Yeah.
Mark, you've talked a lot about self-actualization. Just for our listeners, can you describe what you mean by self-actualization? Are you really talking about Maslow's top of that pyramid? How would you talk about that?
Yeah, I've been definitely drawing on Maslow a bit. I think Maslow's slightly superseded now, and I don't mean that in like a critical way. Just science evolves, and Maslow was operating a while ago. I draw on Carl Rogers' work a lot, who was a contemporary of Maslow. I love Carl Rogers, but I also think a little bit superseded now, or at least we've managed to kind of put a bit more structure on some of that work. So what I mean by self-actualization, if I could put it somewhat simply, is partially a self-discovery process. So we have some minimal innate self. I stress minimal. So it's not that there's this like true you in there that you just need to bring to the fore, but there will be some physical parameters that you have. Like you can't be a pro basketballer if you're short. That's one that I bring up quite a lot. You will have some dispositions and some talents. It's undeniable that some people just have a knack for certain things. At the same time, you can develop a skill in just about anything. So it's more like paying a bit of attention to these things that you brought to the party. And you want to try to develop an ability to distinguish those from things that you have been socialized into or that your culture has really impressed upon you, what's kind of more true to you. But it's not necessarily the case that you're going to like everything that's true to you. So you might have some innate qualities where you're like, oh, I just happen to be like a real pushover or something like that. Like I acquiesce too often to people that I should really push back against, something like that. And you know that's very authentic to you, but you'd still like to change it. So the next part of it then is self-creation. So once we've kind of got a sense of who we are, then we also want to think about who we'd ideally like to be and also who we feel a responsibility to be. So I call it the ideal self and the ought self. That's from self-discrepancy theory. I think the ought self is really important. So, and that's kind of the main subject of the valuable life part of the book, the third part of the book. So what sort of ethical principles do you want to stand for? And often those are things that you need to create. You need to find them out in the world. And you're like, oh, I really vibe with that. But you can also find them in childhood memories. So I think if we all think back to our adolescence and our youths, we would identify things that just made us really incensed, where we were like, that's an injustice and I don't like that. And then those are kind of clues that maybe this is something that you should revisit and figure out why it is that you cared so much about it and figure out how it is that you could live today and shape your life around promoting those kind of values. And then you'll find people that you can do that with. You will find activities that correspond to those values. And this is how you bring about this life and this personality that you want to be. So that's what I mean by self-actualization.
Thank you. It's great. Yeah.
We're fans of Mihai Csikszentmihalyi's work on flow. And we love how you address flow in the book with Zest. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. So I'm Hungarian, or my family is Hungarian, and Csikszentmihalyi's name is just the most unpronounceable thing, and I'm always kind of feeling sorry for the non-native speakers who have to deal with it. Because I even my accent's too strong to kind of pronounce it properly. But yeah, it's just such a quintessentially Hungarian name.
Oh. And it is brutal it is absolutely brutal to pronounce. Yes.
I don't even try anymore because I cannot, I just, the flow guy, you know.
So Zest and flow. So Zest comes from Bertrand Russell, who was a British philosopher who wrote a really lovely little book called The Conquest of Happiness shortly after World War II, if I remember correctly. I don't think he has a particularly clear sort of definition of what he means by happiness or what he means by zest, for that matter. But it's like a very entertaining book, and I think it's got a lot of small diamonds, gems of insight in there. But basically the way he talks about zest is kind of like a healthy appetite for life. And he sort of contrasts it against gormandizers and people who have what he calls Byronic happiness, and these people who kind of take life a bit too seriously and sort of aestheticize it and then look down on people who are just in it and enjoying it. And so I think that's quite a useful touchstone to have as well. And it kind of comes back to the treadmill and making the treadmill a place you want to be. Like, do you have a healthy appetite for your life? And if not, then, you know, what's making it distasteful to you? And is there some way that you can adjust that? The flow idea is a bit more complicated. So flow is usually studied in activities. So it's usually studied in things like piano virtuosos or athletes, people
Yeah.
who are really engrossed in something. And that's because flow is defined as being lost in the moment or being in the zone. And that kind of experience you have where you don't notice the passage of time because you're just so engrossed in something. And Csikszentmihalyi thinks that this is the kind of closest thing to happiness. And it's quite distinct from a lot of traditional notions of happiness as an experienced mood, because you're not really experiencing it because you can't pay attention to it. As soon as you try to pay attention to it, it slips away. And he has this very evocative and excellent, I think, example of rock climbing, which I happen to do. So I'm kind of familiar with what he's talking about, which is that if you're really enjoying rock climbing, if you stop for a moment and think, oh, I'm having such a great time, then you're just going to pump out and you're going to fatigue and you're going to fall off the wall and the whole thing's going to be ruined.
Which could be a very bad thing to do.
Yeah, absolutely.
Very
absolutely.
dangerous.
Certainly going to kill the mood. So I think that's like a good starting point. And the key criteria for flow is that you have to have high challenge. So it needs to feel like this is something that you're having to achieve. It's not straightforward and easy, because then you'll get bored. It won't be stimulating. You have to, though, have the commensurate skill. So there needs to be a kind of balance between those two things. And then you need high quality feedback. And I would say that you also probably need some degree of intrinsic motivation for whatever it is that you're doing, or at least you need to value what it is that you're doing. Now, Csikszentmihalyi argued in his book on flow that this shouldn't be studied or shouldn't be conceptualized just as an activities-based thing, that there's a way that you can sort of generalize flow across your life. And I argue in the book that if you go through these kind of self-actualization processes, especially in connecting with wider communities of people and wider cultures that are also doing the things that you like doing, then you can bring about this generalized state of flow. So it's a situation where most of the things that you do in your life you are intrinsically motivated towards, or at least value. You have developed the ability to get emotional and affective feedback and really pay attention to that feedback. So you're mindful of it. So you have that high quality feedback and you can introspect on it. And then you're also generally comporting towards the things that you value and that are a good fit for you. So you invest in them. And that then brings about your competence in those things. And because you're competent in those things, you then have that high challenge, high skill balance. You have the high quality feedback. And this is kind of present across everything that you're doing in your life. And then you are lost in the moment, in the zone, but it's for your whole life. And I think that's as close as I can think of to happiness in the kind of very rich sense that I'm talking about with a good life.
And Mark, in that you bring up this idea of a community and sharing this with a community, and you also talk in the book about well-being is something we do together, right?
Yeah.
Is that and it goes back to that initial conversation about the freedom fighter and various different pieces, but how does community add to the sense of well-being? Why is having other people included in your element or your life important for this?
In so many ways. I'm definitely going to forget like at least half of them. I think one of the most important ways is that we have three basic psychological needs. So a lot of this motivational stuff that I've been talking about comes from self-determination theory, which comes out of especially Richard Ryan and Ed Desi's work. And as if I understand correctly, so they were at the University of Rochester, which is also where Carl Rogers was. So I think they're kind of in that tradition. Yeah. They're certainly big on self-actualization and these kind of tropes. Yeah. And they have argued, and I think the empirical evidence is pretty compelling, that humans have at least three basic psychological needs for autonomy, so to feel like you're volitional in your life, competence, and then relatedness, so to feel loved and cared for. And we can totally understand that from an evolutionary point of view. A lone human out in the wild is basically a meat bag, very easy prey. Three humans with spears, devastating, complete apex predator. So it's really important that you have social support. And that would have been the main determinant of your survival in evolutionary periods. So, it's very important that we have this sense of relatedness. I think then there are also more kind of sociological aspects to this. So social insurance, which is kind of where we pool risk across a community in a simple form, like if I'm unwell and people are able to take care of me until I'm well again, and then I can get back in the fields or get back to the office or whatever it might be. Then when those people are unwell, I can take care of them. That's a kind of thing that can only function if we have healthy communities. And we have sort of outsourced over the last 40 or 50 years a lot of these kind of functions to the state or the market. And I think that's atrophied a lot of the kind of bonds of community and bonds of culture that we had previously relied on. And those bonds of community and culture are important for a range of other reasons. So I think generally they just increase the extent to which we feel loved and cared for. But they also increase the sense that we feel like we are participating in valuable endeavors with other people, and increase the sense in which we feel like we are sharing in their maps of meaning. So they perceive the world the same way that we do, they value the same things that we do, and we all do these things together and we practice that culturally. And it's very hard to kind of do culture by yourself. So we need to have these community building activities.
That was really well said. There's so much fun stuff that we could dive into, but I'd like to move our discussion to music, if we could, for just a minute.
Speaking of culture,
yes, it's cultural, it's individual, it's self-actualization. There's a whole bunch of things that we could go there. But imagine that you were stranded on a desert island for a year. Okay. And this is the desert island disc question. So, which I'm sure you're ready for. So which two musical artists would you take with you? And not the individuals, but their catalog of work.
Their catalog of work. Yeah, this is a tough question. Because I like more kind of individual songs. If I had to go with artists, two people do, I guess, spring to mind. So one is The Weeknd, but particularly his earlier work, House of Balloons, which I thought was an extremely poetic and deep album. And I think now he cranks out bangers, but they don't have as much kind of allegorical power as some of the tracks in that first album, which is a very dark album. And I think I mostly listened to it at times of my life that were a bit more existential. So I'm glad to not be in that zone anymore, but I still...
Yeah, I am too. Yeah, that's good to move on.
And then the other artist would probably be, and I don't actually know his name, but the guy who did the album for Streets of Rage, and anyone who's played Streets of Rage, which is a classic Mega Drive video game, will recognize the first track of that, which is called Go Straight. And I think there's a lot of people from my generation who kind of played Mega Drive games, if you heard that track now, you would instantly just know it. It would be somewhere deep in your bone marrow. And you'd be like, oh, wow, I know this track. Where is this from? And there's a bunch of videos on YouTube of sound engineers and that sort of thing discovering this track for the first time, because it was made in 1990 or something like that. Wow. And just been this is incredible. This is beyond what I thought the technology was capable of at this time. And that guy has made numerous other albums for video games or other soundtracks for a range of video games. And he also makes club music and all sorts of stuff like that. So I just find his work super cool, I think is one way I'd describe it. And I would take him to a desert island.
So the wonder of the internet is while you were doing that, I could go and Google this. And so Yuzo Koshiro is who, at least, and don't quote me on that because this was a quick Google search, but
no, that's him. Yeah, so. Total genius.
It's fascinating to me that we don't have more conversations about music as it's associated with visual things like video games or movies.
Yeah, Hans Zimmer. How good is the Dune album? Incredible.
Yeah.
Well, and so again, my 15-year-old, the favorite pieces are Broadway's, and again, it is
like Hamilton.
It's I mean, that's where it started, but it's Beetlejuice. It's all these others that have transcended that, but it's part of not just the music, which is compelling, and there's some musical aspect of it. It's part of the story. There's that the journey that goes on in that musical, and it tells whatever that story is, but it is the visual aspect of it too, and the experience of being part of something and then being able to return to that just through the music. So I'm assuming that might be similar to playing that game in a game and hearing that if you have that iconic component within there. So,
Well, can I say two quick things on this? So one is that my alarm in the mornings is a bird song that my mum recorded out in her backyard. And living abroad, one of the main things I miss about Australia is the morning chorus. So it's been really powerful for me in terms of the pleasantness of my life to be able to wake up to that. And then I was also visiting them over Christmas, and the cicadas have a kind of, I think, 7-year breeding cycle, and each year the volume of the cricketing sound that they make gets louder as they get closer to this breeding cycle, and they're very close to it at the moment. And it's so loud as you walk through the neighborhood that you can't have a conversation. And I loved that. And I was thinking, I want to be buried here among this, because it feels like you're just really connected to nature. Like nature is on top of you. It's kind of inescapable. And I found that very powerful. And if I hear the crickets now, like if you in Evangelion, which is a very famous Japanese manga, the crickets are always there as part of the soundtrack. And it always transports me back to Sydney in the summer. And I find that quite heartwarming.
Fascinating, absolutely fascinating. I actually recorded a track one time in an old studio that there was a cricket that was making that noise.
Nice.
Perfect timing. It was like having a metronome in the studio. It was remarkable, the experience of having a cricket basically be the click track for the tune. Okay, but with all of this, we just have to say thank you so much, Mark, for being a guest on Behavioral Groups today.
Well, thanks for the opportunity. And your questions were very generous. I'm very grateful.
welcome to our grooving session where Tim and I share ideas on what we learned from our discussion with Mark. We have a free-flowing conversation, and we groove on whatever else comes into our zestful brains.
Oh, zestful. I like that. I like that.
I thought was a common or a concept that I really kind of liked. This idea of a zestful life. Yes.
It's good stuff. It's absolutely good stuff. But just to get really important here, we ended the conversation with Mark talking about Streets of Rage and that song "Go Straight." We both listened to it. What did you think?
It was cool. I kind of liked it. Yeah. It was. It's definitely an EDM kind of funky kind of thing. But I went out actually right as he was saying it. I Googled it and then I put it on and I'm going, this seems like a weird song to like this. Yozo, what was it? Who's the artist? Yozo
Koshiro.
Yeah. Like to pick for your person, personally, but I liked it. Yeah.
In 1992, this Sega game employed a guy to write an EDM song.
Sega.
I think it's kind of cool. EDM was not a huge deal in 1992.
Oh, come on. It was called different. It was techno. It was, it was in the dance clubs, Tim. You just weren't out seeing cool stuff.
Fair enough. I was not in the dance clubs. Okay. What should we just make sure that we reiterate here?
Well, I think there's three kind of things I think that are big, or I think we think are kind of coming out from this. One is this idea of, as Mark said, often we get sort of addicted to meaning, or we get addicted to purpose or something like that. And I thought that was really interesting. And then he also goes on to say that this is the thing that I'm really kind of striving on, and it actually inhibits your ability to notice when you're kind of over investing in one thing and not caring about yourself and not taking enough time out. It is this over indexing on purpose and meaning, and I got to do this. It's that big P that we, talk about instead of just the little P stuff.
Yeah, actually, for more on that whole big P, little P thing, we've got an episode coming out with Jordan Grummett, and that's going to be a really in-depth discussion of it. But Mark I agree, he is really hitting on it here, and I like the way he talked about Bertrand Russell's idea. I've been a fan of Russell for a long time, about enjoying the middle road. And of course, Zest, your reference at the beginning, is a Bertrand Russell concept.
Well,
So
there you go. So the second piece, I think, and you and I thought this was really cool. Flow is good, but zest is better. Isn't that
yes.
a great? I mean, I think
Well, yeah.
that could be a lyric in a song. Flow is good, but zest is better.
It sounds like a jingle for soap, actually. But
What is the soap? Isn't there a soap that uses zest?
I think it's called Zest. I think
Or
there is a
is it
brand of
Is
soap.
yeah? Or I thought it was Irish Spring, wasn't
No.
it? Is it that you get zest in the morning from they sing in the shower, right? Is
It could be
that one?
that. There
Okay.
could be that. Okay, but for me, the whole flow is good, zest is better thing is it got summed up when we were talking about how flow is conditional on challenge, right?
Mm,
Like you only get flow when you have sort of that not too hard, not too easy challenge going on in your life. And so it's only going to last while the challenge exists. Um, and life just isn't a constant challenge. It's
what?
not one long continuous challenge. There's periods of rest. We have rhythms, right? We have ups and downs. We have times of challenge, and then we need times of rest. We need times of challenge. We need times of rest. So I think that it's a broader, more middle of the road kind of thing to talk about zest rather than just flow. And I like that generalized sense of flow that Mark talks about.
So is zest like a groove? Like you're in your
Bing,
groove?
bing,
Okay. Okay.
nailed it, nailed it. Yes,
The last thing, and before we dig deep, I think is it. Mark talked about social fabric of life is critical to survival. Like this idea,
yeah.
um, that we need others, right?
We absolutely need other people. And his comment, I have to just quote him here. He said, "One human being in the wild is a meat bag. 3 humans are the ultimate alpha predator."
Oh my gosh, that is a great take. One person, wild, you're a meat bag. You are dead meat, man. But
Yeah.
no, three. Hey, we kick ass. We kick
If there's nothing
ass.
else that you remember from this episode, carry that to work. Carry that to your intramural softball game. Carry that to your card game. Carry that to whatever you're doing socially, and just think about how important it is for us to win together.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah.
I love
Okay.
it. Your card game though. I don't know
Uh,
about your card game. That'd be kind of cheating, wouldn't it?
well, no, if you're playing
You
bridge or
Oh,
canasta
okay.
or
Bridge.
pinochle,
If you're showing your age, Tim.
no,
Bridge.
I don't. Well, I don't, but I know of people who do. How about that? I hear it's making a comeback. Like if you
Is
were
it?
hanging out in the dance clubs, you'd know that Bridge is making a comeback.
It's making a comeback in the dance clubs. Is that like the clubs
Among
are now they have card tables set up on the side and they're playing bridge? Is that what's going
no,
on?
no, it's just among the
With
dance
the
club
EDM
crowd.
of Yozo kind of like
Koshiro.
gong 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 in the background, and I'll take 3 tricks. No, I'll take 4 tricks.
Okay, something. Let's groove on this. Let's groove on this idea of the hedonic treadmill
Hmm.
being not the how do we get off of it, but actually making it something that's worthy in and of itself.
Yes, this idea, stop trying to find the end of the treadmill or get
Mhm.
off the treadmill, as you were saying here, and instead find the treadmill we love to run on. That's a semi quote of what Mark said. And I think this is really interesting because it's a reframing of how we think about general life. And in general, we're always, the hedonic treadmill is this idea that, look, we don't get we get happier for a little bit when we get new things, new toys, that bigger house, the
Yeah.
new boat, whatever it would be, take that vacation. But those aren't sustaining. It's not that we then, the treadmill is moving underneath our feet and we're not moving forward and we're back
Mhm.
to that level of satisfaction or well being. So if we're doing that, then it's the walk itself. It is not the destination. That's the important piece. It is, where am I walking? Where is my treadmill located? What are we doing on that treadmill that I just enjoy being on the treadmill?
Right, right. I have friends who have done the Camino in Spain and Portugal, where they, walk, towards these. It's a pilgrimage kind of a thing. 700 miles. It's
Yeah.
long, and it's all about the journey. It's not about getting to the end. It's about every day getting up and just doing it. And one of the things that I love about hearing their stories is that because you're walking, you're just moving at a much slower pace,
Hmm.
and you become aware of how important it is just to get to breakfast, get to lunchtime, like get to a point in time where you're going to have more water and you can refill. And it's a much simpler approach. The other thing that strikes me about this is research by Dan Gilbert and Hal Hirschfield on how our self continues to change. Like, we're
Hmm.
not just this static thing that gets, an imprint, and then our whole life we're just kind of living on that one imprint. We're actually recreating ourselves on a constant basis, and getting to know who we are on a regular basis is a great way of continuing to invest in the journey and not to think about the end, because who knows what the end's going to be.
So, bad analogy or metaphor coming up here, would that mean that we might have to change treadmills at some point? That the treadmill that we
Ooh.
were on at one point in our life is no longer the treadmill that brings us that joy that we enjoy being on, and that we need to maybe find a different treadmill. Maybe we need to have a life that just doesn't have one treadmill, but instead we have 5 or 6 or 7 treadmills that we get to pick on every day. And it's like, oh, no, this morning I'm doing I'm going to write a book treadmill. And this is that treadmill that I'm going to do, or this is the treadmill of, spending time with my loved ones treadmill. Or am I getting way too weird?
I think that is just mind blowing.
Too weird.
Multiple treadmills. I mean, you and I have talked about the idea of not having one North Star, but having a constellation of stars to think
Yes.
about in as we navigate by.
Yeah.
This is much more less ethereal and much more practical to think about. If we had a treadmill for writing a book, and a treadmill for getting up and going to work, and a treadmill for being a good dad, and a treadmill for being a good uh, partner, like these, they're real.
Well,
Those are
and
all
and
real
and
things.
And again, to take this analogy even worse, maybe one is a treadmill, maybe one is a incline,
A
rowing
mountain.
machine, or
Oh,
a rowing machine. Maybe one is
a stair climber.
ellipse. One's a stair climber, right? They're working
Yeah,
out different muscles,
yeah,
um, and you need to enjoy them.
yeah.
And so there's an aspect of this that I think is just, again, these are ways of thinking about this, and that can help change how what our expectations are at the end. And I think that's a big piece. And that part is part that Mark talked about as well, right?
Okay, well,
This-
let's talk about that. What can we do about it? Like, what does this frame help us get to? How do we actually find a better groove by reframing the way that we think about our treadmill or treadmills?
so stop buying into the narrative that, as Mark talked about, that, hey, within these Western, more individualistic societies, that we are kind of being materialistic cultures and materialistic symbols, as what he say, that it's got to be bigger, that you got to get the new golf clubs that you need
Mhm.
to get your game in perfect. And and then once you get your handicap down, once you have those new clubs and the new thing,
Yeah.
then you'll be happy. So it's not always more is better. It's not always that happiness is the island that you can drive to or get to, right? And
An island that we
I'm
could
just
drive to would be a tough one.
there might be a bridge to the island.
There could be.
You could put your
There
car
could
on
be.
a ferry, and it could take you to the island.
Fair enough.
Oh God.
It also reminds me, Emma Seppala, one of our guests in a past episode, talked about this idea of inner sovereignty
Mm,
and being attuned to our own emotional signals, like sort of take some agency over this. Don't just feel like you're being dragged along in the more is better story. Get yourself out of it. And we get to choose. At home, we can just stop believing that all the things in our lives are going to make us happier. Like that, as you said earlier, Kurt, they'll provide a short-term lift, but
Yeah.
rarely are experiences or things in our lives life altering. Most of the
Right.
time, they provide nice boosts, but they can provide that uptick, but they're rarely are they life altering experiences or things like just getting a new handbag or a new coat or a new car, or as you said, the new boat. Like those are good things. Those can feel good, but they're not life altering. Think about the things in your life that you could be life altering.
Right. No, we know that, I mean, from the research, experiences deliver more happiness uptick than things do, or things that you buy that allow you to have experiences
Yep.
and social community things are better than, those other
Think,
types of things right there. So I
yeah.
think that's important to understand, knowing though that again isn't it. I will just take this piece. So for work,
Yeah.
Tim and we've talked about this on the side. I switched over kind of our motto for the Lantern Group. So, we always had these goals that we were talking about, like what are going to be our revenue goals, what are going to be, the types of programs that we want to get, who are the clients that we want to achieve. And we still have that as part
Yeah.
of our big thing. But our big overarching motto, I switched it around about 4 years ago, 3 years ago, and it's now do cool work for cool clients, right?
Yeah.
Do cool work for cool clients. And that is enjoying the treadmill. It is the treadmill that we're doing. It doesn't, if it's a $50,000 program or a $250,000 program or $500,000 program, right? Those are elements that are important and we need to have that in order to maintain it. But I will do a $50,000 program for a cool client, that's cool work, much more than I wanna do a $500,000 program for crappy clients that is crappy
Yeah.
work, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So, it's
Absolutely.
not about the money, it's not about the end goal, it's about that journey.
Well, this also gets me thinking about how Mark talked about this generalized flow, and right that we can't really sustain constant challenge at work every day. Like
Mhm.
if you're challenged every minute of every day, it's just fatiguing. And by the way, on the other hand, if your mind is caught up in doing paperwork and administrative stuff, that boredom will kill you as well, right? You can't have too much low, but you can't have too much high. You need to be able to find sort of a generalized flow, which you alluded to earlier is a groove, I think. And business is like that. Like you need to think about in your business career what you're doing to increase challenges from time to time when you're feeling like you're not getting enough, and when you're getting too much challenge, when you're working 80 hours a week and not seeing your loved ones or friends, you got to pull back a bit and figure out how to have less challenge from time to time.
Well, and I mean, you and I have both talked about this. We've done work with organizations about employee engagement where this is a real thing.
It
Like,
is.
you have to create the working environment for your employees where that challenge is there, but you also have downtimes and that it isn't just boring. Remember doing work with a company, a manufacturing company in Minnesota. They made the springs that went into a snowmobile, right? That was what they
Yep.
did. They were manufacturing. And
Right.
these guys on the line, I mean, they were working a machine 8 hours a day, which is basically like you pull a lever, you put something and you move it out, you put something in, you pull a lever. I mean, that's what they did. It was the most monotonous, crazy thing. And so we had to figure out, how do you create engagement? And so again, from a safety perspective, because people zone out,
Right.
but also from this perspective of how do you get these people so that their job is enjoyable, that they're looking for different things. And we did a variety of different factors of job sharing, of mentorships, of rotating on different machines. I mean, they were like, well, you got to be an expert. Yeah, but you can train other people to be experts, and then you can shift machines, and then putting people into, other aspects about improvement. And so it was adding variety in various different things. And now that in and of itself allowed these employees to be much more engaged at work. And, that's the stuff that you need to be thinking about from that.
Yeah. Lastly, I just want to say that we have to really work hard to disconnect our thinking from the social norms. This
Mm.
idea of happiness that is thrust upon us, it's really difficult because the world
The world.
that is doing this thrusting of this is what you should strive for. The world doesn't care if we buy new luggage or have a new car or a new sweater. The world doesn't care if we fail or succeed. All of that only matters to us. So we have to decide how we're going to spend our time and what we're going to spend our time on.
Well, and we have to decide for ourselves what it is that is going to make that journey enjoyable,
Right.
right? It is not it might be a bigger house. It might be that promotion. It might be that trip to Hawaii, but it doesn't have to be. It
Right.
doesn't need to be. And if for you, that might be a piece of it, but the larger piece is, what am I doing on a day in and day out basis? Who am I sharing my life with? What are the activities that I am doing? Am I getting outside? Am I, getting able to challenge myself and to grow in what I learn and understand about the world? Whatever that would be that makes your life enjoyable. And it isn't always, what the world is saying that we need.
What we choose to strive for makes a difference. Okay, to get back to your analogy of multiple treadmills, we get to choose which treadmill we're on most of the time. Not all the time. Sometimes we got to be on one treadmill, sometimes another, but most of the time we get to choose. So if we're going to strive for something that that provides meaning for us in our lives,
Yeah.
let's get on the treadmill that we love.
And just this other piece that you had talked about, that, hey, everything isn't a competition. And in particularly in work and different
Yeah.
pieces. And sometimes it's good to be not in competition and or even challenged, and just to sit with yourself and to maybe even be a little bored. Kind of like when I talk with you most of the time.
I'm sorry, what did you say?
I zoned you out, Kurt. All right. All right. I
Um,
think that wraps it up. What do you think?
I think so. I think we can end it there. Absolutely. Groovers, if you're not watching episodes on our YouTube channel, please go check it out.
Yeah, we
It's
have lots
really
of, you get
fun.
to see our ugly mugs, and we have shorts that, hey, if you don't need, you don't have time to listen to the whole episode, oftentimes you can go out to YouTube, and there's like a number of little short snippets that capture some of the
Yeah.
best moments from this. So those are great.
Yep.
Also, give us a nice rating on your podcast listening app. If it's Apple, if it's Spotify, if it's Podbean, whatever it would be, and leave a short review of this episode if it helped you adopt a fresh lens of work or life. And then lastly, for me at least, is, if you need help with your work and getting people engaged in various different pieces, Tim and I are available for hire. We can come in
Yes,
and bring
we are.
all of this knowledge that we have in our big brains, and make your work more zestful and fun and engaging, and that leads to more profits and better results. So there you
Uh,
go.
Basically, life just gets better when you hire Kurt and me. That's that's the short
If
story
you're a cool person, because we only do cool work for
for
cool people.
cool people.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So if you're cool and you have some cool work, we might consider working with you. Yeah.
And of course, we hope that you use some of Mark's insights this week as you go out and find your groove.